You probably think your smart device stopped working because it got old, or maybe because you dropped it one too many times, or because technology just doesn't last like it used to. But what actually killed it wasn't time or damage or bad luck. It was an update. The very thing that promised to make your device better quietly reshaped how it works behind the scenes, slowing it down, removing features, or in some cases locking it out entirely. And the unsettling part is that this isn't a glitch or an accident. It's a built-in mechanism, because in modern devices, the hardware you paid for is no longer the product you truly own. It's just a terminal connected to a system that can change at any moment. And the moment that system shifts, your device can lose value overnight. Most people assume updates are neutral or even helpful, but firmware updates aren't just cosmetic improvements or bug fixes. They sit at the deepest level of your device, controlling how the hardware itself behaves. Meaning when a manufacturer pushes an update, they're not just tweaking performance, they're rewriting how your device operates at its core. And here's where the hidden mechanism begins to reveal itself. Because these updates are rarely designed with your current device in mind. They're designed for the next generation of products, for new chips, new sensors, new ecosystems. So when your older device installs that update, it's suddenly trying to operate under rules that were never meant for it. Like forcing an older engine to run on fuel it wasn't built to handle. The result is subtle at first. A slight delay when you open an app, a feature that used to work instantly, now taking a few seconds longer. Maybe a setting disappears or gets buried deeper in menus. And most people brush this off as normal aging, but that's the misbelief. Because what's actually happening is resource reallocation. The update is prioritizing processes that benefit the manufacturer's broader ecosystem, not your individual device. And over time, those small changes compound into something more noticeable: slower performance, reduced battery life, compatibility issues, until eventually the device feels outdated even though the hardware itself hasn't fundamentally changed. And then there's the second layer, the one that doesn't just degrade performance, but can remove functionality altogether: app dependency. Because many smart devices don't actually function on their own. They rely on companion apps to unlock features, control settings, or even turn on, which means the real brain of the device isn't inside the device. It's inside an app that can be updated, redesigned, or discontinued at any time. And when that app changes, your device changes with it, sometimes overnight. You might wake up one morning and find that the app has been redesigned. A feature you relied on is gone, replaced with something else, or worse, locked behind a subscription. And this isn't a bug, it's a system-level decision, because companies aren't just selling hardware anymore. They're building ongoing revenue streams. And the easiest way to do that is to move control away from the physical product and into software they can modify whenever they want, turning ownership into something closer to a license. The evidence for this pattern shows up everywhere once you start looking. Smart home devices that lose integrations after an app update, thermostats that suddenly require new accounts or subscriptions, speakers that drop support for older streaming services. And in each case, the explanation is framed as progress, as necessary change, but the underlying pattern is consistent. Functionality is being reshaped not for stability, but for alignment with the company's current business model. Then there's the third breakdown, the one that feels almost invisible until it happens. Cloud dependency, because many smart devices don't just rely on apps. They rely on servers you don't control, meaning the actual logic that makes your device smart often lives somewhere else entirely. And if that server goes offline, changes, or is shut down, your device can lose its core functionality instantly. Think about that for a second. You could have a perfectly working piece of hardware in your home, something that physically functions exactly as it did the day you bought it, and yet it becomes unusable because a remote server was turned off. And this isn't hypothetical. It's happened repeatedly across industries. Devices that once worked seamlessly suddenly reduced to basic functionality or complete failure because the company decided to discontinue support. The common belief is that this only affects obscure or niche products, but the reality is broader because maintaining cloud infrastructure costs money, and once a product line stops generating enough revenue, those costs become a liability. So companies make a calculation, not about what you own, but about what's worth maintaining. And when that calculation changes, your device becomes collateral. Around this point, you've probably experienced something like this yourself. A device that suddenly didn't work the way it used to, a feature that disappeared, an update that made things worse instead of better. And if you have, hit like and subscribe, and drop a comment with what stopped working for you. Because once you start comparing notes, a pattern starts to emerge that's much bigger than any one product. Now here's where things get even more unsettling, because the fourth breakdown isn't just about software. It's about how the hardware itself is designed to depend on that software. Physical design tied to digital control, where components that used to function independently are now locked behind firmware or app-based permissions, meaning even if the hardware is perfectly fine, it can't operate without the right digital authorization. In older devices, a button did what it was designed to do. A switch controlled a circuit. The relationship between input and output was direct. But in modern smart devices, that relationship is mediated by software. So pressing a button might send a signal to firmware, which checks with an app, which may even verify something with a server before allowing the action to complete. And each of those layers introduces a point of control that can be modified or restricted over time. This is why repairs have become more difficult, not just because of physical complexity, but because functionality is increasingly tied to software states that can't be easily replicated or bypassed. And insiders in the industry will quietly acknowledge this, that devices are being designed not just for performance or aesthetics, but for controllability, the ability to manage how and when features are accessed long after the sale. And then there's the fifth layer, the one that ties everything together, feature regression, where updates don't just change how things work. They actively remove capabilities that once existed, sometimes justified as streamlining, sometimes as security improvements, but often aligning with new product releases or strategic shifts. Because if an older device retains all its features indefinitely, it competes with newer models. So features get deprecated, compatibility gets narrowed, integrations get dropped, and the device you bought gradually becomes a lesser version of itself, not because it had to, but because the system it's connected to moved on. At around this point, it's worth asking yourself a simple question. Did your device actually fail? Or was it made obsolete by decisions you never saw? And if that question hits a little too close, make sure you're subscribed, because this pattern shows up in places most people never think to look. The consequence of all this is more than just inconvenience. It's a shift in what ownership means. Because when a product's functionality depends on software that can change remotely, your control over that product becomes conditional, tied to policies, updates, and decisions made by someone else. And that has real-world costs, devices replaced sooner than necessary, features repurchased through subscriptions, ecosystems that lock you in and make switching difficult. What mechanics and engineers often admit, off the record, is that the hardware itself is rarely the limiting factor anymore. Most devices could function far longer than they do, but they're part of a larger system designed to evolve continuously. And that evolution doesn't always prioritize longevity. It prioritizes alignment with current business goals. And here's the final piece, the force multiplier that reframes everything. Because once you understand that the real vulnerability isn't the hardware, it's the dependency on external systems, you start to see why some products still last. Devices that operate independently, that don't require constant updates, that don't rely on cloud services or locked-down apps. They maintain their functionality because their control is local, not remote. It's the difference between owning a tool and renting access to a system. And the people who understand this, the ones who've seen these patterns up close, they don't just look at specs or features anymore. They ask a different question entirely. What happens to this device when the company stops caring about it? Because that's the moment when you find out what you really bought. And by then, it's already too late.